designated room, Jessica's in-laws-to-be, John and Linda, were already seated. They seemed to have been talking about something, as their faces wore an eerily amused smile. I wondered what was so funny as I looked at the table, and saw that there were settings for 3 on our side. I realized this was a sly way of harassing us and said to myself, I see. Please have a seat. Oh, it's just the 2 of you? We're a single-parent family. I lifted the corners of my eyes and replied as calmly as I could. But Linda still had a lingering smile. Right, I remember now. Maybe you should take this in a Tupperware? It must be tough being in a single-parent household. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress her laughter. Despite her harsh words, I didn't even bat an eyelid. Seeing this, Jessica tapped my shoulder. That's terrible. Mom, let's go home. Why's that? If it means you have to suffer, I'd rather not get married. Touched by my daughter's kindness, I smiled and firmly said, That's not necessary. Just wait a moment. Then, a female staff member came from behind with a takeaway box the size of a lunchbox, offering it to Linda with the words, Please, take this with you. John and Linda were taken aback, looking surprised. If being low income is tough, please, take this. What? My name is Emily Johnson. I'm in my 50s, feeling the midpoint of my life deeply as I live in a slightly spacious 3-bedroom house with my daughter, Jessica. When Jessica is at school, the emptiness of the living room feels lonely. During such times, I make it a routine to prepare 2 cups of tea. One for me, and the other for my late husband. Looking at the cup I poured for him, I feel comforted, thinking he might be here with me. He passed away from cancer about 20 years ago, just when we were about to start treatment. Just before he passed away, while lying in bed, he implored me about our only daughter, Jessica. Please take good care of Jessica. She'll surely do great. At that time, Jessica was too young to remember her father well. To keep my promise to my husband and not to let her feel lonely or hurt, I raised Jessica with all my might. Putting my needs second, I balanced work, house chores, and parenting, managing to send her to college even as a single parent. I might be biased, but Jessica turned out to be a beautiful, kind, and hardworking woman, excelling in her studies. She's my pride and joy. After graduating, she got a job at a corporation and started living on her own. I can't always rely on you, Mom. I'll start repaying you back, bit by bit. Don't worry about me. Just do your best. Eat properly, don't stay up late, and remember, I'm not a kid anymore, I'll be fine. What are you saying? You'll always be my precious child. On the eve of her move, Jessica and I talked about the past, the future, and her father until late into the night. We never ran out of memories to share, losing track of time. Even after she started living alone, my smartphone would frequently light up with her messages. From the struggles of unpacking and cooking, to her experiences at work and stories about her colleagues. Every message made me feel as if she was right there with me. Jessica must be feeling lonely in her first time living alone. But after half a year, the messages from her gradually became less frequent, changing from every 3 days to once a week. She's really doing her best. There's a saying that the absence of reliance is a good reliance. The lack of messages probably means that Jessica's days are fulfilling. Thinking this, even the tea I made for my husband seems to nod in agreement. When about 1.5 years had passed since Jessica started her job, on a warm, late autumn day, I received a call. It was Jessica, and as I answered, wondering what was up, she sounded excited, saying, It's been a while. Mom, listen, I want you to meet someone this Sunday. Are you free? Oh, it's been a while indeed. I'm free this Sunday. Great, I'll come home around noon, okay? Sure, that's fine. Be careful on your way. It's been a long time since I've seen you, Mom. You're gonna be surprised, see you then. After saying that, Jessica hung up, and I was left in silence. I wondered when was the last time I had a phone conversation with her. Her unusually happy tone also caught my attention, But when Sunday came, I was indeed surprised, just like Jessica said. At the door, Jessica appeared with a young man named Ethan Parker. He wasn't dressed casually but in a neat, casual suit, looking a bit tense. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan Parker, dating Jessica." He introduces himself, tall and slender, with a face as handsome as a model's. He gave the impression of a polite and good young man. "Oh, Jessica has been in your care. Please come in." I offered him guest slippers and invited them to the living room. As I made tea and we sat at the table, Jessica shared her recent news and introduced him. Then, blushing, she said, "The reason I wanted you to meet him is, I want to marry Ethan." Marry! Though I had a hunch, it still struck a chord to hear that Jessica had found someone. I maintained my composure and looked at Ethan, who now seemed more serious than before. "Yes, I proposed to Jessica recently. And we wanted to meet with you, her mother." After a brief silence, I said, "I see. I didn't know Jessica had such a wonderful person in her life." "Ethan, Jessica grew up without a father. I raised her all by myself." "Yes, Jessica told me she was raised by a single mother." "Jessica is my treasure, my only daughter. Will you truly protect and make her happy?" "Of course. I'm confident I can make her happier than anyone else in this world." Ethan responded confidently, not intimidated by my demeanor. Had he faltered here, I might not have consented to their marriage. "I understand. Please take good care of Jessica." When I said this, the two exchanged relieved glances and smiled happily. Seeing them like this, I naturally found myself smiling as well. I think he would have smiled in the same way if he were here. A few months after sending off a happy Jessica and Ethan, Jessica took a long break and came home. She happily talked about her work and Ethan, but occasionally, she would have a troubled expression, which worried me. When asked, she would avoid the topic and say, "It's nothing, Mom." Jessica has a habit of shrugging her shoulders when she wants to talk about something or is lying. She shrugged this time too, so I was sure something was bothering her. "Hey, Jessica, how about we visit that new cafe that just opened? This one here." I pointed to the cafe on my smartphone screen. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, I've been wanting to go there. They're known for their original coffee. It's popular at work too." Then it's settled. The next day, Jessica and I walked to the cafe in the cool air. It was deep into winter, and the brown fallen leaves crunched under our feet. We ordered coffee to go and walked for a while. "Mom, thanks for accepting Ethan and me. He seems sincere. Take good care of each other." When we reached a large park, Jessica started to open up. "Actually, I went to greet Ethan's parents. They didn't seem to think much of me." Her story went back a month. She had gone with Ethan to greet his parents, John and Linda. But they seemed skeptical of her from the start. "Hello, I'm Jessica Johnson. I'm dating Ethan." "Ethan, are you sure about this girl?" Linda interrupted Jessica's greeting. "What do you mean? Just look at her. She looks poor, her clothes, her makeup. She's not a match for Ethan." Instead of congratulations, they openly criticized Jessica. "Mom, that's rude. How can you say that about my girlfriend?" "You think so too, right?" Linda even sought agreement from John, who simply nodded in affirmation. "Oh, is your family very poor? Do your parents work?" "My mother works, and my father passed away when I was young." "A single mother? I thought as much." John seemed oddly satisfied and scoffed. "Dad? It must be for the money. Ethan, our family is of a distinguished lineage. You shouldn't be with this kind of woman." "How can you say that? Jessica is different. I know her better than anyone." "You're just naive. There are plenty of people who would marry for our wealth." Shockingly, John even suggested introducing Ethan to a daughter of an acquaintance. Linda agreed and seemed pleased with the idea. "That's a good idea. After all, this girl's father works for a major listed company. She's not a match for a single-parent family. You think so too, right, Ethan? Seeing his mother happily agree, Ethan raised his voice. Enough, both of you. That day, the conversation went nowhere, and Ethan had to lead Jessica away from his parents' house. Later, Ethan told Jessica that both John and Linda had a strong sense of elitism. Jessica, I'm really sorry. My parents said such awful things and hurt you. He apologized repeatedly and promised to always protect her. Listening to this on a park bench, I was struggling to contain my anger. So, what did his parents say about the marriage? We went again last week, and despite their sarcasm, Ethan convinced them to accept us. Are you okay with that? Jessica bit her lip and shrugged. Yeah, I'm okay. We won't be living together, and I can handle it. All right. It was clear that the relationship between the Parkers and Jessica was strained. Even with Ethan's promise to protect her, there would be limits. Knowing the difficulties ahead, I wished I could advise her to reconsider the marriage. However, having already given my consent, that was no longer an option. Even in just this short period since the greeting, Jessica looked so downcast. The thought of her having to wear that sad expression for the foreseeable future was unbearable. About the meeting between both families, I think maybe I shouldn't attend. Why? Because I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I'd rather not have the meeting if it's going to upset you. Until then, Jessica had been acting bravely, but now her eyes seemed to well up. Though she didn't cry, she was evidently trying to spare me from the same unpleasant feelings. Her kindness pained me, but I smiled. Don't worry about me. Let's have the meeting properly, so your marriage is recognized by everyone. Under the cold sky, Jessica and I sipped our cold coffee on our way back home. When Jessica told Ethan about wanting to go ahead with the meeting, he seemed very surprised and worried about her. You don't have to push yourself, he said. I'm fine. Mom doesn't mind either. If that's what you want, I'll talk to my parents about it. On the day of the meeting, Jessica and I went to the venue. We were silent, but I decided to face the situation with my head held high and my chest puffed out. We took a taxi to the designated famous hotel, taking deep breaths at the entrance. However, Jessica was still anxious. When the hotel was chosen, Linda had made a snide remark, adding to Jessica's unease. That famous hotel featured in commercials. I know it's a place unfamiliar to your family. Such unnecessary comments should have been brushed off, but Jessica took them to heart and completely shrank into herself. I gently embraced Jessica's shoulder, signaling with my eyes, it's going to be okay, and we started walking together. At the entrance, Ethan, who seemed to have arrived earlier, was waiting for the elevator. Thank you for adjusting your schedules to meet today. Ethan looked much more nervous than the last time we met, sweating even in the cold of winter. No, thank you. We appreciate your efforts today. Well, you might have heard from Jessica, but this hotel is where my father works, and... Ethan stuttered, clearly worried his parents might say something offensive. Given their attitude towards Jessica, I expected they would treat me the same. I replied with confidence. Yes, I am aware. There's no need to worry. Besides, you look more handsome when you're confident. Ethan looked up sharply, just as the elevator doors opened, and an announcement indicated we should proceed upstairs. We stepped in and rode up to the designated floor. Entering the assigned room, John and Linda were already seated, smirking in a way that seemed both creepy and amused. Glancing at the table, I noticed that only 3 sets of dishes were prepared on our side. I immediately understood this subtle form of harassment. Oh, we've been waiting for you. Please take a seat. Oh? Just the 2 of you? We are a single-parent family. I replied, lifting the corners of my eyes, trying to stay calm. But Linda's smile turned into a sneer. Oh, right. Why don't you take this home in a container? You must be poor. Single mothers must have such low incomes, always hungry, right? That's right. The income of single-parent families is well known to be low. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, barely holding back her laughter. Despite the shocking comments, I remained unmoved. Seeing this, Ethan couldn't help but cry out. "Dad, Mom, stop it right now. This is too disrespectful." At that moment, Jessica tapped my shoulder. "This is terrible. Mom, let's go." "Why?" "If it means my mom, who sacrificed everything for me, has to suffer like this, I don't want to get married." Hearing this, Ethan turned around in shock. "Jessica!" I looked at them and said firmly, "That's not necessary. Just wait a moment." Then, a female staff member approached from behind with a lunchbox-sized pack and offered it to Linda. "Please, take this to go." Linda and John were taken aback, looking utterly confused. "If you're concerned about low incomes, please, take this." "What?" "At least Mrs. Johnson here is far from being poor." The staff member, speaking clearly, placed the pack down and stepped back gracefully. Linda and John were indignant. "You! How dare you do this?" "That's right. You're fired, fired." "Right, dear?" "Both of you, please calm down. She's an old friend of mine. The rude ones here are you too." The woman turned to me, smiled briefly, and said, "The division head is always so busy." "Division head!" Linda and John's reactions were comically exaggerated, almost tumbling off their chairs. John was sweating profusely, not just on his forehead but all over his face. I hadn't intended to hide it, but I am the daughter of the president of the group company that owns this famous hotel. I have worked for this company for many years, continuing even after marriage. When I was pregnant with Jessica, I took maternity leave like any other employee and raised her while working in place of my husband. By the time Jessica entered college, my efforts were recognized, and I was promoted to division head, thanks to recommendations from colleagues, but this couple was unaware of it. Are both of you listening? I addressed the two lying on the floor with a firm voice. Today, we came here to discuss the marriage between my dear daughter and your son, Ethan. It seems you have spoken very poorly of my daughter. I glared at them, causing John and Linda to shudder. I replaced my husband, who passed away from illness when my daughter was young, working hard to provide her with both love and education. Ethan swallowed nervously. I trust my daughter and the person she has chosen. Even if they come from a family that judges others by income and behaves rudely, I see Ethan as a respectful and fine young man, an important addition to our family. I paused for a breath before continuing. I believe you too care for your child. So, I ask again, do you accept the marriage of my daughter and Ethan? The room fell silent. John and Linda were trembling, and Ethan seemed to hold his breath. Jessica had never seen this side of me before. She was speechless behind me. Well? Linda looked resentfully at John. He, pale-faced, adjusted his posture and hurriedly said, Of course, division head. We look forward to a close relationship in the future. I am here today not as a division head, but as Jessica's mother. I firmly stated, looking at John. And if we talk about work, aren't you soon to leave this place? What do you mean? I had already investigated John's reputation within the company. When Jessica told me Ethan's father was John Parker, the name rang a bell. His disdainful attitude towards Jessica and being a hotel employee was a dead giveaway. He had a bad reputation in the hotel, and I had often heard about John's high-handed behavior towards his subordinates. Additionally, he was reported to be absent from work under the pretext of meetings, and a personnel hearing was imminent. That's why you should really reflect on your own actions, I told the speechless John. Linda suddenly stood up, her face red with rage, and lunged at me with a wild scream. But when I easily dodged, she fell over with a groan, like a squashed frog. To Linda, who was sprawled on the floor, I delivered a final warning. Also, know this, if you ever interfere with Jessica and Ethan's happiness, I won't stay silent. After pinning down the helpless couple, I urged Jessica and Ethan to leave with me. Of course, I left their handling to my childhood friend. Half a year passed, and it was now summer. The sticky humidity was tough to bear, especially in my 50s. The weather forecast promised another day of intense heat, making an umbrella essential outdoors. As I walked to the supermarket, I thought about what happened afterward. After the meeting, Ethan had apologized to Jessica and me several times. "I'm really sorry for my parents' disrespectful behavior." He was so apologetic he even bowed to the floor, prompting me to quickly lift him up. "You don't need to go that far. Your sincerity is apparent. It's just so embarrassing. I don't want anything to do with such parents anymore." "But they are the ones who raised you, aren't they?" "No, my aunt and uncle raised me. My parents left me with them until I went to college." I had always wondered why Ethan's character was so different from his parents' arrogance. It turns out his aunt and uncle, who raised him, were decent people. Recently, Ethan formally cut ties with his parents after they came begging for money. After the meeting, Linda called Ethan in a panic. "Ethan, your dad lost his job. They said it was due to job negligence." But Ethan responded indifferently. "That's tough. Don't talk like it's someone else's problem. We're out of money, you need to send us some." "Mom, I know about it. Uncle told me you have a spending habit, right?" "What are you talking about?" "If you could just get rid of that habit, wouldn't our lives be more comfortable? Please stop relying on me. That guy, always saying unnecessary things." After that, there were several more phone calls. Linda had exhausted her savings because of her spending habit, and even John's retirement fund was running low. Struggling financially, Linda and John were not only asking for money but also insisted on speaking to the division manager. They kept calling all the time, morning, noon, and night, so eventually, Ethan's patience ran out. "Both of you, just stop it. I don't want to cause trouble for my wife or mother-in-law." Saying that, he abruptly ended the call and blocked their numbers. Not only that, Ethan changed his cell phone number and moved to a new apartment with Jessica, changing their address. Of course, he didn't tell his parents, so John and Linda had no way of knowing what happened to Ethan and Jessica afterwards. This removed any disturbances in the couple's happy married life. From what Jessica told me, since then, they have been living peaceful days together. As for me, I've managed to build a good relationship with the newlyweds, having meals together 2 or 3 times a month. Also, this incident made me realize a big misunderstanding. I had been working hard to ensure Jessica didn't face hardships raising her on my own, but in doing so, I had completely stopped going on trips, which was my hobby. Jessica thought she was the reason I gave up my hobby. My efforts to spare Jessica any worry or hardship ended up making her worried about me. "Don't worry about me from now on. I want you to spend time and money for yourself, Mom." Until Jessica said that, I was enjoying living alone at home, but since then, I started going on trips on weekends. I, who loved domestic travel, started visiting places I wanted to see and places with fond memories. Strangely enough, as I worked hard in my daily job, I began to feel it's okay to spend time and money on myself. Moreover, exploring recent lodging facilities has even benefited my work. Projects have been progressing more smoothly, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Thinking of this as thanks to Jessica, I finished paying at the store and left. Today's shopping was also for ingredients to cook dinner together with the 3 of us. Looking up, I saw Jessica coming from the opposite side. "Mom, are you okay? Don't overdo it, let me carry that for you." Jessica hurried over and easily lifted the shopping bag in my right hand. "Oh, thank you. Shall we go then?" "Yeah, Ethan's gonna come right after he finishes work. He's been looking forward to your summer vegetable curry," Jessica said, smiling sweetly. "I'll have to make plenty then." Recently, there was happy news. Jessica is pregnant. This made not only me and Ethan happy, but Jessica as well. I'm secretly planning to send clothes and toys for the grandchild, keeping it a surprise for the 2. Though I wonder if it's too early, I know the child will be here before we know it. I'm already eagerly awaiting the day I can meet this new life. Women have it easy. Just claim menopause and you can skip work and chores. My husband's words boiled my blood. I couldn't hide my fury at what he said. The changes in my body started after I turned 50. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with menopause. These 2 years, I've suffered from dizziness, palpitations, hot flashes, and various other symptoms. Even though I'm receiving treatment at the hospital, it's only providing symptom relief and not leading to a complete cure. All this time, my husband, living under the same roof, showed no understanding of my illness. Dizziness? Tiredness? Back pain? That happens to everyone as they age. But to label it menopause and skip work to lie in bed all day? Lucky you. As I lay unable to stand due to dizziness, these were his words. He maliciously interpreted my doctor-advised leave as skiving off for a trivial illness. He repeatedly hurled insults and sarcasm at my incurable condition. But this day was different. He looked down on me with a disdainful laugh. If you have time to show off your illness, at least do some housework, like a wife should. I'm Linda, 52 years old. I live with my husband, David, 3 years my senior. We met through a mutual acquaintance in our late 20s and hit it off immediately. We smoothly continued our relationship and married in our early 30s. Though we occasionally had minor quarrels, David was kind. We both worked hard and lived a peaceful life. We don't have kids, but have supported each other well as a couple. However, a few years ago, our marriage underwent significant changes. I was working full-time but am currently on leave. Due to ill health. Specifically, I started experiencing menopause symptoms in my late 40s, leading to frequent health issues. Initially, it was irregular menstrual cycles and sudden hot flashes, but the symptoms worsened over time, including severe palpitations and sleepless nights. Eventually, it even affected my mental health, causing irritability and depression. Menopause brings about various symptoms over approximately 10 years around the time of menstruation stopping. I had heard about it, but experiencing it myself was far more challenging than I imagined. My symptoms were severe, and on family advice, I started hospital treatment, but there's no cure. The doctor said menopause involves diverse symptoms, so treatment is usually symptomatic. I'm using prescribed medicine and herbal remedies, but they only temporarily alleviate symptoms. It became hard to continue working, so I took leave when I turned 50, 2 years ago. My company allows up to 3 years of leave, and soon I'll have to decide whether to return or resign. I don't want to quit, but there's no sign of my symptoms easing, so resignation looms as a frustrating reality. If I quit, I dread what David might say. Initially, David was concerned and attentive when I fell ill with menopause. He wasn't one to take the lead in household chores, but he used to care when I was unwell. I thought he was kind, but as my health issues dragged on, he started to look at me with annoyance. When I discussed taking a temporary leave from work, he didn't take it well. I don't quite get what's up with your health, but do you really need to take leave? You're not just planning to slack off at home, right? He said, which shocked me. Men also experience menopause, but David, despite his chronic condition, has rarely been unwell. He's always maintained good health, so he seems to view my prolonged unwellness as laziness. No matter how much I explain my symptoms, he never shows understanding, always saying, "What's the solution then? If one method doesn't work, find another. Why keep saying you can't heal? Find a way to get better." Continuing to work in my current state is tough. When I expressed my desire to take a leave of absence until my health stabilizes, David, as expected, got furious. However, when I told him that not only my boss, but also my colleagues and juniors, urged me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, albeit with dissatisfaction. I had resolved to work harder on household chores while I was off work, but there were times when I suddenly felt unwell and couldn't even get up. Standing up made me dizzy, and even sitting down, I couldn't stop sweating, possibly due to hot flashes. Still, when I tried to force myself to vacuum, I was mercilessly struck by severe back pain. I ended up taking medication and enduring the pain, only doing household chores when I felt a bit better. But David still didn't understand. "Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the doctor?" As expected, he gradually started treating me coldly. "You know, don't be so dependent all the time. If you're on leave and staying at home all day, why don't you at least finish all the household chores during the day? You can't be feeling sick from morning till night. Coming home to no greeting, dinner that's just cut and cooked, what are you doing at home?" David complained more than once when he returned from work. His exasperated sighs and attitude were shocking to me. Over the weekend, when I was feeling ill and lying down, he yelled, "How long are you going to sleep? At least do the laundry." David's sarcasm and complaints increased day by day, and there was no more consideration or concern from him. While his terrible attitude hurt me, I also grew increasingly anxious, wondering when my symptoms would heal or if they ever would. However, it was truly a blessing that my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Emily, who live in the same town, showed understanding of my condition and occasionally offered advice. Barbara is over 80 years old but has strong legs and is a very lively person who speaks her mind. My father-in-law has already passed away, and she lives with Emily and her husband. It was Barbara and Emily who first suggested I go to the hospital and even said I should consider taking a leave of absence if my condition was too severe. I'm really grateful to them, as both my parents have already passed away, for being so caring about my menopause symptoms. One day, David told me, "For Mom's birthday, we're gonna have a dinner party at our place next weekend." In David's family, it's been a tradition since his childhood to have big dinner parties for family birthdays. Since marrying him, I've participated every year. Depending on the year, we've either gone out for meals or had a party at his parents' house, but this year, we decided to have Barbara's birthday celebration at our house. Naturally, I was in charge of the cooking. Barbara and Emily were supposed to come over in the evening, and Emily's husband couldn't make it due to work. "Make sure you're in good shape for the day," David said, glaring at me sharply. "I won't tolerate it if it's like last year." "I understand," I replied, as I could only nod in front of David's assertive attitude. The thing is, last year, I felt ill during Barbara's birthday and missed the party at my in-laws. David seemed to think he was embarrassed by this. I still vividly remember being harshly scolded by him when he returned home, which was really tough and made me cry. So this time, I want to make sure I'm in good health for the dinner party, just as David said. However, if it were a condition that could be fixed just by wanting it, I wouldn't have been suffering for years. Hoping for even a slightly better condition, I started preparing little by little. Barbara is going to be 85 on her next birthday. Wanting to show my gratitude for all she has done for me, I vowed to put my best effort into cooking dinner for everyone that day. Since we're hosting the in-laws, there's a lot to do before the day, besides meal preparation. David is somewhat prideful, so I knew he wouldn't be satisfied unless the house was cleaned from corner to corner. I took a few days to thoroughly clean the house, all the while consulting my health. David never helps with the housework, just relaxing in the living room, but I've gotten used to that. I know some younger men nowadays do housework, but in David's generation, it's considered the wife's job. I never expected him to help, since he thinks I just loaf around the house all day. The day before the party, I finished shopping for the dinner menu and went to bed early, praying that I would wake up with mild symptoms. However, on the day of the dinner party, I woke up with terrible headaches and dizziness. When I tried to get up from bed, my vision became all wobbly, and I had to close my eyes. Then, I heard the intense pounding of my heart and was struck with a headache so severe it felt like my head was being hammered. It was one of the worst symptoms I've experienced recently. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to get out of bed, only to be greeted by David's loud TSK from above. Realizing I was unable to prepare breakfast, he grabbed only his wallet and phone and headed towards the door. He said indifferently, "I'm gonna grab some food. Then, because I feel sick being around you, I'll head over to Mom's place early. Make sure you have dinner ready and greet them properly," and he left the house. Indeed, David was supposed to pick up Barbara and Emily today, but showing up so early in the morning must have been inconvenient for them. His thoughtless words hurt, but I couldn't afford to stay upset. I just drank some jelly drink and took my medicine, lying in the living room until my symptoms settled. But even in the afternoon, my condition hardly improved. The medicine eased the headache, but I felt dizzy and unsteady whenever I tried to get up. I needed to start preparing dinner soon, but I couldn't get my body to move as I wanted. I stood in the kitchen for short periods, taking breaks in between, but time was running out. Feeling desperate, I tried calling David but couldn't reach him. I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. Eventually, it was 5 p.m., still not fully ready, and David returned home with Barbara and Emily. David entered the living room and looked at me sitting on the kitchen floor with a puzzled expression. "You didn't even greet Mom and the others when they arrived. Is dinner ready?" "It's not even set up," he said, and I was at a loss for words. I had made a salad with torn leafy vegetables and tomatoes. But beyond that, I had hardly prepared anything else. Anticipating another scolding, my heart raced with anxiety, and I struggled to breathe, but I decided to apologize and explain the truth. "David, I'm sorry. This is all I could manage." "I'm really sorry, but could you order something tasty for the main dish?" "I'm sorry," I said. David's face turned red, and his demeanor changed drastically. "Don't play the sick card now. This is an important dinner, and Mom was really looking forward to it. And you're just trying to embarrass me again like last year?" David was furiously angry, scolding me harshly. "It's not like that. I'm not trying to play the sick card." "You are. It's pathetic that at your age, you can't even manage your own health. You're inconveniencing us all because of your issues." David didn't listen to me and continued to berate me. "Then why didn't you answer the phone? I sent a message saying to eat out. I even sent another email 3 minutes ago asking you to order something. Why are you so insistent on eating at home when you do nothing?" I exploded with pent-up frustration, shouting back loudly. Each word felt like a blow to the head with a metal bat. My vision was so blurred I could hardly see David's face properly. I couldn't hear anything over my own voice and pounding heart, and I was sweating profusely from the heat. The symptoms I had been managing with medication were now coming on strong, and I regretted it a bit, but I couldn't keep silent with David. When my vision finally cleared a bit and I caught sight of David, he was standing there with his mouth agape in a foolish expression. Then our eyes met, and he glared at me, pointing his finger strongly. "What's with that tone of voice? Pretending to be sick and hiding in the house, not doing any housework, you lazy." And then snapping back when pointed out, "You're the worst. Such a wife is unfit, I'm sick of supporting you. If you can't do the housework, then let's get a divorce," he yelled loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Despite my desperate pleas, nothing seemed to affect David. After years together, the fact that David could suggest divorce without hesitation made me feel so miserable that I was on the verge of tears. I had no choice but to agree to the divorce. Just as I was about to speak my agreement, I heard light footsteps. But David, in his rage, didn't seem to notice. "What's the big deal about menopause anyway? Being tired, having stiff shoulders, that's normal for our age. Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad if you're taking medicine. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you?" Then someone tapped David on the shoulder from behind. It was Emily. With an anger I had never seen before, Emily swung her right hand as David turned around, striking him hard across the cheek. David, hit by a powerful right straight from a 60-year-old woman, fell to the floor, looking up at Emily, bewildered, not understanding what had happened. "Hey, sis. Why did you hit me all of a sudden?" As he rubbed his cheek, puzzled, Emily glared at him sharply. "And you, what's with that attitude? Have you been treating Linda like this for years? Deciding the severity of her illness without being a doctor and berating your wife, you should be ashamed," she yelled furiously. David, always trying to look good in front of his family, had never treated me so coldly. Even when he was berating me with disdain as I suffered from dizziness, he became caring about my health and made coffee himself as soon as Emily visited. I had confided in Barbara and Emily about my illness, but never about David's behavior. I was worried that speaking ill of David, their blood relative, might make them resent me. They might not believe me, as they hadn't seen how he treated me. Even if they did believe and sympathize, I feared how David would retaliate after they confronted him. But now, seeing Emily's actions, I wondered if my thinking had been wrong.
What do you mean? It's Mom's birthday party today, and I wanted her to enjoy it. But she ruined the dinner by not cooking, isn't she to blame?
David stood up and pointed at me, blaming me further. Then Barbara, who had come into the living room with Emily, glared at David.
Are you saying Linda ruined the dinner? That's just your opinion, isn't it? From what I've heard, Linda did as much as she could despite being in pain. When she realized she couldn't finish in time, she contacted you to change the location or order something. I don't want to be celebrated by someone who's unwell. And I'm certainly not happy to be celebrated by a son who only complains after pushing everything onto his sick wife.
Barbara spoke firmly to David. Then Emily asked, "Did you just leave Linda alone when you knew she was unwell and come to our house?"
Well, what could I have done? There are many things you could have done, like helping with housework or being considerate of her condition. Didn't I tell you to be more caring toward Linda when she first started feeling unwell? You just found it bothersome, didn't you?
David was at a loss for words, cornered by Emily's sharp comments. It seemed Emily had told David to be more attentive to me after I started feeling unwell, but David's behavior made it clear he hadn't heeded her words. Why do you and Mom always take her side? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Being tired or having palpitations, that happens to everyone as they age. Women who just want to be lazy call it an illness and make themselves out to be patients. David continued to justify himself. Emily sighed and began to explain.
You might not know this, David, but I also suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It's only recently that they've settled down, but they were so bad that I quit my job 10 years ago. You're saying that a disease that forced me to quit my job isn't real?
Hearing Emily's words, David froze, looking stunned. I had talked to Emily soon after my menopause symptoms started. She told me that she had suffered from menopause at the same age as me and had to temporarily stop working before eventually resigning. She didn't want to quit her job, but there was no sign of recovery, so after consulting with her family, she decided to prioritize her health. I knew Emily had quit her job around the age of 50, but I didn't know the reason until she told me. Thinking back, I realized that I hadn't seen her around that time. We mainly communicated by email because she couldn't meet due to her poor health.
It was really tough back then. I thought it might never get better. But Michael, my husband, told me to quit my job and take it easy, Emily said.
Michael, Emily's husband, is 5 years younger than her. His work involves irregular hours and night shifts, so he couldn't attend the dinner. I don't see him often, but I remember him as a kind man who always asks about my health. Emily, having such a compassionate husband, desperately appealed to David.
Linda isn't your servant, you know. Shouldn't a husband be more caring towards his wife?
I'm sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell back then, but I didn't realize it was for that reason.
David replied, sounding defensive. But Emily's expression remained stern.
Right now, it's not me you should be apologizing to, but Linda,
Emily stated firmly. David, looking frustrated, turned his face towards me. David loves Emily, so he generally can't go against her words. Eventually, he seemed to give in. I'm sorry. Being scolded by my sister has been a wake-up call. From now on, I'll help Linda and let's get along well, he said, looking into my eyes with a sincere tone. I thought he finally understood and felt relieved, thinking of forgiving him, when I heard, wait a moment. It was Barbara who intervened. Tired from standing, she approached the sofa with Emily's support and sat down next to me. Then, locking eyes with me, she said sternly, "Linda, don't take David's words seriously. You should get a divorce quickly." "What? What do you mean?" I asked, surprised. Barbara began to share a past experience.
"Actually, I suffered from similar symptoms at your age. There was no name for it like menopause back then. From what you've told me, I think I also had menopause. I've mentioned this before, haven't I?"
I nodded slightly at Barbara's words. When Barbara was about my age, menopause wasn't widely recognized. And there were no treatments, let alone understanding from others. Barbara chuckled with a troubled smile and pointed at David.
"David used to say terrible things to me when I was suffering back then. It was around the time before he married you, I believe. He was still living at home, and he would say things like 'hurry up and make dinner,' 'how long will you sleep, you're the mother, stop pretending to be sick,' and such unkind words."
Barbara's face looked pained, as if recalling those difficult times.
"Is that true?"
I asked David, wanting to believe in him. He awkwardly turned his face away without denying anything, indicating that what Barbara said was true. Barbara looked down painfully and said, "My late husband, David's father, got angry at David's behavior back then and hit him. When he was severely scolded by his father, David said the exact same thing, that he had a wake-up call. Indeed, after that, David stopped saying anything to me. That's because he soon married you and moved out. But Linda, he treated you badly, didn't he? So, David hasn't changed at all. Even after decades, he has no understanding of someone else's illness." She spoke calmly, dismissing David's words as mere excuses.
"No way! Just wait a minute, I won't do it anymore, believe me."
David tried to intervene, but Emily grabbed his arm to stop him.
"I saw it back then too. That's why I hit you like Dad did. Remember, after Dad scolded you, you were crying and apologized to Mom, saying you wouldn't do it again, that you had a wake-up call, and that it was your fault. But now, you're doing the same thing to Linda that you did to Mom. Asking to be believed after doing the same thing twice is just too convenient. There's no way we can believe you,"
Emily admonished, and David bit his lip in frustration. As he fell silent, Barbara grabbed my shoulders and said, "That's why you need to divorce David and escape quickly. Otherwise, you'll continue to suffer. Now, with my daughter and me here, is your chance. If it's just the two of you, he'll never admit his faults. He might even get angry at you for embarrassing him in front of his parents." I felt sad to hear such words from his own mother. The thought of divorcing at this age was daunting, but hearing Barbara's story made me feel like I couldn't go on with David. I had endured his treatment, believing that once my symptoms eased, we could return to living happily as before. But it would likely just be a brief respite before things got worse again. I also felt rising anger at learning David had verbally abused Barbara in the past. Suppressing my ongoing dizziness, I stood up and, looking straight at David, expressed my intention to divorce. David shook off Emily's hand and shouted, "What, so everyone's against me now?" Everyone in the room looked at David with cold eyes. Faced with such gazes even from his family, David turned red with rage. "Fine, I get it. If that's what you all say, then I'll agree to the divorce," he said, angrily consenting to the divorce. The dinner party was cancelled, and Barbara and Emily went home. David stayed at a hotel. Our divorce proceeded without any dispute over property division and was finalized smoothly. Afterward, I focused on recuperating from my condition, living alone after separating from David. About half a year later, I received a call from David, whom I hadn't been in contact with at all. Since leaving him, I had moved into an apartment and was living alone, regularly visiting the hospital for my treatment. As expected, the call was filled with David's selfish demands. I had been feeling better recently without any stress, but the call from David gave me a bad feeling. He had a pre-existing condition that, according to him, worsened after our divorce and him living alone. Yet, David always boasted about perfectly managing his own health. He even used that to insult me when I was unwell, calling me lazy for not getting better sooner.
Why did it get like this? You said you could manage your health perfectly, right?
I retorted, although I knew the reason. David's idea of managing his health was shallow, just choosing what to eat from the meals I prepared, considering balance. He never had to cook from scratch because I always planned the meals with his health in mind. Moreover, since he never did any household chores, his living standards plummeted over the past 6 months. His diet consisted of convenience store meals and retorts, only showering, not cleaning, which inevitably led to his deteriorating health. I won't be able to live like this. That's why I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year, your illness must be cured by now, he said without any remorse. Apparently, he first turned to Emily and Barbara, but Emily was busy caring for Barbara and couldn't help. Reluctantly contacting me as a last resort, David pleaded. Though I wanted to refuse, he was, after all, my husband for many years. I thought of ignoring him, but David said, then at least come and look at the album I found in the closet. If you don't want it, I'll throw it away. I hesitated, thinking it might be old photos, including good times with David and Barbara's family. Despite being disillusioned now, our relationship was good back then, and there were photos with Barbara and Emily. I decided to go and pick out my part of the photos from our former home. The house we lived in until half a year ago was dirtier than before, possibly due to neglect. Empty convenience store meal containers were left on the table, making me frown involuntarily. Without you, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move when I'm feeling unwell, David excused himself without being asked. He looked unexpectedly well, despite claiming to be unwell. Moreover, despite seeking care in anticipation of worsening health, what David really wanted was cleaning, laundry, and meal preparation. It seemed like he just wanted a housekeeper. After some hesitation, I replied, "You don't look injured and seem perfectly fine. Why don't you stop slacking off and take care of yourself?" At this, David narrowed his eyes displeasedly and retorted, "You know my illness affects my internal organs and nerves, right? Don't judge just by appearances. I'm really suffering, and you dare accuse me of slacking off." He spat those words out. I just stared at him coldly in response, and he started to stutter. Suddenly, David stopped. And, taking a deep breath,
"I was wrong to say that to you when you were suffering. I'm truly sorry and have reflected deeply. I won't do it again, so please."
Before he could finish, I firmly declined.
"Sorry, but I can't take care of you. I'm still dealing with menopause myself, and I can't trust your repentance."
Then, a desperate David clung to me, seemingly without any concern for how he appeared.
"Please, I could be hospitalized at any time due to my worsening condition. Medication alone isn't enough, proper diet management is essential, and I'm in trouble without you. Please, I'm begging you."
While David seemed genuinely remorseful, I remembered what Barbara and Emily had told me about his past actions.
"They say he only apologizes deeply when he wants to blame you for not forgiving him."
Recalling her words, I shook my head slowly. I was already overwhelmed with my own issues and not in a position to take care of someone else. If I went back to living with and caring for David, the stress would likely exacerbate my menopause symptoms again. I couldn't go back to square one after finally starting to feel better. It's impossible.
"If you really need care, use a caregiving or helper service,"
I told him, explaining these options. I made it clear again that I couldn't provide care and had no intention of living together in the future, then returned to my life. Later, as my symptoms settled, I resumed work after a long leave of absence. I started returning to work gradually. There was a time when I contemplated resigning, but now that I need to live on my own, I have to earn my living expenses independently. Additionally, having always found fulfillment in my job, despite the break of 2 years and a few months, I found it enjoyable once I started working again. I had no intention of reconciling with David or remarrying anyone else at the moment. However, I still kept in touch with David's family, occasionally meeting them for meals. I heard that the traditional family dinners, a long-standing custom in David's family, were discontinued after this incident. Furthermore, David apparently quit his job for reasons unknown. He claimed it was to focus on his treatment, but his visit frequency to the doctor and dietary habits hadn't changed. He had some savings from early retirement, so he seemed financially stable for the time being. Nevertheless, he appeared to be living in fear of an uncertain future due to his illness. As for me, I plan to continue cherishing my health and living a fulfilling life for the rest of my days. Just as construction began on our new home, my husband lost his job. He had promised to pay half of the mortgage even if he had to work part-time, but he couldn't find another job and didn't even work part-time. When our new home was completed, he suddenly came up with a ridiculous idea.
I've decided to give this house as a wedding present to my adorable niece. We can always buy another house. If you disagree with me, let's get divorced right away.
Huh? What does he mean? I was shocked, but I knew his secret, so I was ready to happily agree to a divorce if that's what he wanted. Smugly thinking he had his way, my husband quickly filed for divorce. Then he started asking about the division of property. When I threatened to reveal his secret, his attitude changed dramatically. With the help of a certain person, his plan took an unexpected turn, leading to an unbelievable situation. We had been married for 3 years. Next year, I will turn 30, and my husband, Daniel, will be in his mid-30s. We discussed whether to have children. Bearing a child requires physical strength, and one cannot always maintain their current health. I wanted to have a child before my mid-30s and discussed this with Daniel. If he felt it was unnecessary to force ourselves to have a child, I was okay with that. However, Daniel said he also wanted a child, but our current home was too small for a family. He suggested considering buying our own home. Raising a child and owning a home would cost a lot, not to mention a mortgage of nearly 30 years. By then, Daniel would be in his mid-60s, likely retiring. I didn't want our child to struggle because of a mortgage. My mother worked full-time while raising me and doing household chores. She worked until retirement, supporting my father and me. I always respected her and decided to work while maintaining a household. With this in mind, I was determined to realistically plan for our own home. We chose a builder and our home plan was on track. Fortunately, we had savings, so we decided to pay a large down payment to reduce future mortgage troubles. Just as things were coming together, Daniel's company went bankrupt, and he lost his job without any severance pay. I asked if there were any signs of the company failing, but he snapped back, saying he couldn't have known as he wasn't a senior executive. One morning, he went to work only to find the office closed with a notice. It said the company had gone bankrupt the day before. It was a small company, and apparently, the executives had fled in the night, leaving no severance pay or salary for that month. I suggested putting the house plan on hold, considering our uncertain future. However, Daniel insisted we continue since we had already made plans. He promised to find a new job without being picky and convinced me to put the plan on hold temporarily. I thought he would find a job quickly if he wasn't choosy. I decided to continue with our plan once he secured employment. Daniel started visiting the employment office and searching for jobs online. He even found a temporary part-time job, although it was on a call-in basis. Even so, it was a temp job on a call-in basis, so he never knew when he'd be working. His actions and commitment to pay the mortgage together made me feel his determination. Since my income was stable and we could manage without his help for the time being, I decided to go ahead with our house plan. Up to this point, you might think Daniel was a very sincere husband. However, he had an odd obsession. Daniel has an older sister, who had a child, Mia, at a young age. Becoming an uncle at a young age, Daniel adored Mia immensely. My sister-in-law lived far away due to my brother-in-law's job transfer, so we didn't see them often. But my husband, Daniel, would send gifts and a lot of cash to his niece, for allowance or as Christmas gift, sometimes 5 times the usual amount. I even opposed him once when he wanted to give $2,000 for Christmas gift, arguing it was too much even for his beloved niece. When sending gifts to his niece, who lives far away, we usually mail them. But after Daniel reported spending money to send something to her, I never heard any word of thanks from my sister-in-law, which was frustrating. I questioned my husband's nerve when I heard that he had given his niece an expensive gift without regard for the family budget, even when unplanned expenses came up at one point. Since then, I've often been frustrated with his excessive fondness for his niece. Now that Daniel is unemployed, thankfully, he doesn't seem to be dipping into our savings for his niece's sake. However, his time away from home, supposedly job hunting, has significantly increased. In fact, he leaves the house earlier and returns later than he did when he was working. I wondered if job centers were open that late. He said he was attending information sessions and networking. It's great he's eager about job hunting, but he's been careless about our new home construction, leaving everything to me. He arrogantly told me to handle all the paperwork, though he wanted his name on the deed. I gently reminded him to show some interest in our home. He sighed, saying he was too tired from job hunting and asked me to handle it. I was tired too, juggling work, the new home, and household chores, so I didn't argue to avoid a fight. Later, I worried he might say I should pay the mortgage since I made all the decisions. When I brought up the mortgage payments, Daniel said he didn't want to dip into his personal savings until he found a job. He said it was to avoid burdening me, but I thought we should focus on the present rather than potential emergencies. Despite my explanations, Daniel insisted on not using his savings and wanted me to handle the mortgage for now. Since his suggestion was too convenient for him and differed from our original agreement, I asked him to sign a loan agreement, acknowledging he was borrowing money from me for his share of the mortgage during this period. He complained but reluctantly agreed, fearing I might probe deeper into his job hunting progress. In response, Daniel continued to complain, but he reluctantly accepted, perhaps realizing that it would be troublesome if I started probing into his job hunting situation. We agreed that he would repay half of the mortgage payments I made during this period once he was reemployed. I got his signature and stored the document where he wouldn't find it. Despite our initial agreement, there were several instances of him failing to uphold his promises. Daniel said he'd find a job quickly without being picky, but he hadn't reemployed as our new home neared completion. He even turned down a few temp job offers, making excuses. I didn't want to support a husband who made no effort to find work. Our arguments increased as I urged him to find a job. In the meantime, the new house was finally finished and ready to move into. But living with him, let alone moving, seemed difficult under the current circumstances. I had gathered various information since Daniel was laid off. There are many things I want to confirm and say, including the fact that he still hasn't found a job. As usual, I called out to Daniel as he was leaving for the job center. I asked him to spend the day with me, saying we needed to have a serious talk. He tried to escape, prioritizing job hunting and suggesting we talk another day. I insisted, saying missing one day at the job center wouldn't be a problem. Then, he said something shocking. Nagging women aren't attractive, you know?
What? Actually, I have something to tell you too. I thought I'd wait, but it's good news, so why not now? My niece is getting married. So, I've decided to give her our new house as a present. Let's split the mortgage and keep paying as we are.
What? I was already appalled by his excessive love and financial sense towards his niece, but gifting her a whole house? Why would he make such a big decision without telling me? Hearing about his niece getting married was news to me. I couldn't believe he thought he could go through with such a plan without discussing it with me. When I pressed him, Daniel suggested divorce if I didn't like it. He was the one who initiated the house building while unemployed and not making any progress. Yet, he kept making uncertain promises about work. His plausible words didn't match his actions. I was so astounded by his behavior that I laughed. That's why I wasn't surprised when he made the absurd suggestion to gift our house to his niece. It must be related to that issue. Despite my curiosity about his response, I bombarded him with questions.
Are you serious? You're unemployed, and you want to gift a house with a remaining mortgage to your niece? Do you think she would be happy with that?
I wondered how he could think of giving away a house we're paying a 30-year mortgage on. It's not a good omen to gift a house with an unpaid mortgage. It's like sending troubles. I also pressed him about his plans for having children since we bought the house for our expanding family. Daniel responded defiantly to my questions. He said he doesn't mind getting divorce. He used the threat of divorce to avoid discussing his thoughts. It was as if we weren't even the same people anymore. Our conversation just wasn't working. I had a lot to discuss, but it seemed he was far more unreasonable than I thought. I had already planned to initiate divorce, so I easily accepted his suggestion. I told him I was fine with divorcing and leaving the house, as long as he listened to my demands. Daniel agreed to follow my instructions if I allowed the divorce and left the house. So, I said it's okay to file for divorce first, but I wanted to settle the property division after it was official. I also told him that I needed to hurry with my preparations to live alone, so I asked him to wait until things settled down. Daniel agreed to follow my lead if he could file for divorce immediately. In truth, I wanted time to prepare for something important without him knowing. I said this to buy myself time to prepare for living alone without him finding out. After the divorce and finishing what I needed, I was waiting for the right time to contact Daniel. Then, either out of impatience or realization, he contacted me first. What's going on? Why is our new house listed for sale? It's supposed to be a gift for my niece, and it's our joint property. If you do something like this without my consent, I won't pay the mortgage. Then, Daniel called, complaining about me selling our jointly owned house without telling him. He was furious and wouldn't listen to me. I waited for him to calm down before responding.
I knew you were trying to push the payments onto me. Did you really think it was still in joint names? You were so confident about divorce, I made sure to check everything before agreeing.
When he asked to keep it in joint names, it indeed was. But, feeling distrustful towards my husband who was somehow making excuses to push the mortgage payments onto me alone, I suspected that eventually, he would refuse to pay any money at all, claiming the house as his own. So I changed the ownership. As expected, when the house was completed, Daniel started acting strangely. He insisted on gifting the house to his niece, believing his true intentions were still hidden. So, I paid off the mortgage in full with all my assets. Actually, when my parents learned we were building a house, they sold some land inherited from my grandfather and gave me the cash, advising me to use it for the payment. My parents always believed in paying for expensive items in full. My parents always said it wasn't wise to easily commit to a mortgage, given its uncertain future. That's why, when we were building our house, they provided financial assistance so we could pay in full without a loan. I could have followed my parents' advice, but just as I was about to discuss this, Daniel lost his job. I thought if he knew about this money, he would become even more irresponsible, so I kept quiet. Also, if I paid in full, I felt Daniel, with his attitude, would likely never repay me. I didn't want to trample on my parents' kindness by revealing this. Daniel was furious when he found out I had changed the house's ownership without his knowledge. He accused me of breaking our promise to keep the house.
The house is still there, isn't it? It's not demolished, it's perfectly habitable. It's still existing, even if in someone else's hands, so you have no grounds to complain. If you really want it, you can buy it back.
It's my prerogative what I do with the house I paid for in full. Of course, I could have chosen to live in that house. But living in a home planned with my estranged husband felt wrong. When Daniel realized I had sold the house, he angrily said I shouldn't make excuses. He then started insisting he had a right to part of the money from the sale as it was marital property. He demanded an immediate partial payment, saying we'd settle the exact amount later. I told him we should meet to discuss this and other matters. I arrived at the designated place first and waited for Daniel. Shortly after, when Daniel arrived at the designated place, he was about to say something upon seeing me. I showed him something before he could speak, and he was stunned into silence and looked at it carefully. What I showed him was the result of a private investigator's surveillance. It revealed his infidelity. There were enlarged photos of him kissing another woman on the street. There were photos of him dining at fancy restaurants and entering a hotel. According to the report, Daniel did job hunt for a few days after losing his job, but people around his mistress said they met around the time our house construction began, and they were seeing each other almost daily. Daniel had been playing the sympathy card with her from the start, claiming to be single and considering marriage, but struggling to find a job due to the recession. He wasn't just seeking sympathy, he was financially exploiting her, asking for money and gifts under the pretense of marriage. His actions, demanding money and gifts under the pretense of marriage, were akin to those of a marriage scammer. Knowing this made me feel sick. His sudden insistence on divorce seemed like he had had enough of everything. My talks about the mortgage, his uncooperative attitude, he probably got tired every time I brought these up. It seemed he planned to switch to his mistress, who was more sympathetic and compliant than me. The story about gifting the house to his niece was just an excuse to get a divorce. I realized his intention to use my refusal as a reason for divorce right away. He thought he was manipulating me, but in reality, I was the one in control. I had hired a private investigator when I noticed Daniel's strange behavior and knew about his affair. The excuse about gifting the house was unexpected, but I had already decided on divorce once I learned of his infidelity. What I wanted to discuss before moving into the new house was this matter. Initially, I planned to confront him about the affair and proceed with the divorce, but seeing his irrational behavior made me realize he was not someone I could reason with. So, I decided to let him think he had his way while I strategized in the background. Holding all the evidence, I confronted him.
I have solid evidence of your affair. You can't escape this. I will demand alimony from you. You knew and kept quiet? What kind of woman stays silent knowing her husband is cheating? You're no good. Loving? You were the one betraying me, weren't you?
When Daniel started talking about being a loving husband, I couldn't help but burst into derisive laughter. As I countered his statement, he hesitated for a moment, then as if struck by a brilliant idea, he again insisted on his right to property division. At that point, I made a call to my father-in-law as my final card. I informed him that Daniel was demanding a share of the property. Daniel started to rant about why I needed to involve his father, but he stopped abruptly when I told him his father wanted to speak with him. I put the phone on speaker, and Daniel heard every word of his father's scolding. His father berated him for his behavior, asking what a man over 30 was doing, and whether he wasn't embarrassed by his infidelity and the ensuing family breakdown. Furthermore, he ridiculed the idea of Daniel asking for property division after causing such chaos. Daniel has always had a bad relationship with his father-in-law, unable to defy him since childhood. His father-in-law detests dishonesty and particularly loathes those who harm or deceive others. After Daniel brought up divorce, I first consulted with my father-in-law. I asked for help only if I couldn't resolve things myself. My father-in-law assured me he would deal with Daniel, who had strayed into infidelity. I had many things to say to Daniel, who had betrayed me. If my father-in-law intervened too soon, Daniel might have fled. So, I kept silent about consulting with him. Part of the reason I wanted to delay things after the divorce was to arrange a meeting with my father-in-law without Daniel knowing. I also needed to ensure that Daniel didn't find out about the sale of the house. Additionally, I wanted to clarify Daniel's relationship with his niece. I called his sister in front of his father and asked her if his niece had ever received expensive gifts, allowances, or holiday money from Daniel. His niece said she had never received anything substantial from Daniel. His sister even mentioned that when his niece was young, Daniel attended her birthday parties without bringing any gifts. He gave only a cheap birthday card. I also asked about his niece's supposed marriage plans. It turns out that his niece, whom he claimed to be dating, had no plans for marriage, and she was puzzled about where the story even originated. She had never expressed a desire for a house, and in fact, would find it burdensome and troubling if offered. Both my sister-in-law and father-in-law were surprised to hear about Daniel's alleged fondness for his niece. So, where did all the money Daniel claimed to spend on his niece go? His sister then provided valuable information. When Daniel was around 20, his father was away on a work assignment. And Daniel got caught up in a police raid at an illegal casino. Daniel was terrified of his father finding out about his encounter with the police. Daniel begged his mother, who picked him up from the police, to keep it a secret. Under the condition of full confession, it came out that Daniel had been taking valuables from the family storage to fund his gambling addiction. Although he had promised to quit, his gambling seemed pathological, and it was doubtful he had stopped. Hearing this, my father-in-law checked the storage against the inventory and found several items missing. He confronted Daniel about his gambling, accusing him of using his niece as a cover for his addiction.
You're still gambling, using your niece as a cover, aren't you? It's quite a position for an unemployed man to be gambling. The money from the property division isn't for your bets.
He ordered Daniel to return home for a serious talk, saying he would set him straight. Unable to defy his father, Daniel turned pale, despairing, and conceded he didn't need the property division and would pay alimony. Afterwards, I received the official documents prepared by the lawyer my father-in-law had arranged for me, stating that Daniel had renounced his claim to the property division. I gained all the shared assets. Additionally, through my father-in-law's consideration, I received a larger-than-average lump sum of alimony from Daniel. At one point, I admittedly felt anger towards Daniel's mistress. However, my feelings changed when I investigated her during the process of Daniel's infidelity investigation. She believed Daniel was single and struggling financially and had been giving him money despite her own tight financial situation. I realized she was also a victim, used by Daniel. Even though she was deceived, she tearfully apologized for disrupting my family. And she offered to pay me compensation, though it was a small amount. I declined her money, appreciating her gesture enough. I also advised her that she could likely claim alimony from Daniel. I told his promises of marriage and demanding gifts and money amounted to fraud, and then she promptly took action upon this advice. When she confronted Daniel at his parents' house, accusing him of deception for marriage, my father-in-law became furiously angry. He told her she could file a police report and instructed Daniel to turn himself in immediately, causing a huge commotion. Daniel begged for mercy from both his mistress and father-in-law, promising to repay all the money he had swindled from her. Daniel used up all of his meager savings to pay off the mistress's alimony and reimburse her for the gifts, leaving him completely broke. My recently retired father-in-law, having plenty of time, closely monitored Daniel. The supervision was so strict that he even followed Daniel to the bathroom and scheduled every minute of his day. Daniel was taken to the job center under his father's escort and was constantly pressured to find a job quickly. Unable to endure this prison-like existence at home, Daniel attempted to escape while his father was asleep. Desperate and penniless, he couldn't bear the hunger and returned to his father-in-law's house within 2 days. Following this, his father, disappointed and exasperated, disowned Daniel for lacking backbone, whether in staying home or fleeing. Daniel, left with nothing but the clothes on his back, broke into his parents' storeroom in desperation, repeating his past actions of stealing valuable antiques. However, his father, aware of Daniel's past thefts from the storeroom, had now secured it properly. The installation of security cameras and a contract with a security firm meant that Daniel was quickly caught and faced the police for the second time. With his mother no longer alive to help, and his sister furious about using her daughter as a pretext, no one was willing to bail him out. My father-in-law refused to take him back, suggesting he must learn his lesson in jail. Of course, I refused to help, stating that he was now a stranger to me. As for me, with the house sold and the money in hand, I'm considering investing in some much-needed personal rejuvenation. I've rented a top-floor apartment in a building I've always wanted to live in. Now, I plan to enjoy the view, savor delicious food, and take some time to care for myself after these tumultuous years with Daniel.
Today, I'm hosting a Christmas party for 20 family members. Make sure you don't embarrass me.
I was completely baffled by Sean's declaration. I was sure the Christmas party was supposed to be at Sean's brother's house. After a while, my father-in-law and mother-in-law arrived. Seeing me clutching my stomach and breathing heavily, they clenched their fists and looked furious. The next moment, my mother-in-law shouted Sean and went back to the living room. In the living room, my father-in-law grabbed Sean by the collar, and the next moment, a loud smack echoed through the room. My name is Kelly Oakwood. I'm a 31-year-old housewife. I married Sean when I was 28. We met at a restaurant we both frequented. We were both regulars there and knew each other by face, nodding in acknowledgement whenever we saw each other. It was a casual acquaintance at first, but one day, when the restaurant's popular dish was down to the last one, Sean kindly offered it to me. Sean is a big guy with a loud voice to match. He's assertive, but at that moment, he bashfully said please, go ahead, and gave me the dish. His shy demeanor and large frame seemed so out of balance that I found it adorable. In hindsight, it was a complete oversight on my part. We exchanged numbers and went on several dates. Our first date was at a burger place, and on the next date, he took me to a fashionable bar while I was wearing casual shoes, without consulting me. Sean lacks consideration and has a habit of making decisions on his own without consulting others. Sean, who works for a major electronics manufacturer, seemed successful and boasted about being the first among his peers to advance in his career. His tendency to act unilaterally was a frequent topic of his pride. Perhaps love is blind, as I mistook Sean's behavior for masculinity. Looking back, this was a grave mistake. Sean proposed to me on our third date. I thought it was too soon, but he had already booked a wedding venue. I was more surprised by his initiative than anything else. Eventually, I gave in to Sean's persistence, and we had a whirlwind marriage within a few months. My parents were surprised but were also overwhelmed by Sean's assertiveness. Sean wanted me to quit my job and become a housewife upon our marriage, but it was too sudden, and I couldn't leave my job. I told Sean I would work until we had children, and he reluctantly agreed. Sean was the type who wanted his wife to take care of the home. The first year of our marriage was blissful, without any major issues. Sean continued to make decisions unilaterally, so things like buying a car or choosing a new home were done without my input. I had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights on our honeymoon, but before I knew it, we were eating pancakes in Hawaii. If I overlooked Sean's self-centered behavior, it was a happy life. However, things started to change dramatically when I became pregnant after a year. It felt less like tumbling down a hill and more like riding a roller coaster. When I found out I was pregnant, I quit my job and stayed at home as Sean and I had agreed. To our surprise, I was expecting twins. Sean seemed deeply moved, saying I'm going to be a father to 2 kids at once. He was so happy that he even bragged about it at work. Sean's phone wallpaper was the ultrasound image of the twins. Sean was showing off the ultrasound image everywhere. I secretly thought it was in poor taste, but I kept quiet. Since it was my first pregnancy with twins, I felt more nervous and anxious than happy. Sean was too caught up in his excitement to pay any attention to my worries. The obstetrician advised me to have a managed hospital stay due to the risks associated with multiple births. Sean agreed to this. It seemed even he was worried about what might happen. Being in the hospital was a relief for me, but I was also worried about something else. Our home. Sean doesn't do any housework. Being the eldest of 3 brothers, he had never done any household chores. It's more accurate to say he couldn't rather than he didn't. Sean comes from a distinguished family, and his house is the main family home. Perhaps that's why he was spoiled growing up. He never had to do housework, and it seems someone always took care of his personal needs. I couldn't leave Sean alone at home. I couldn't imagine coming home to an untidy house after being discharged. So, I asked Sean's parents for help. I asked them if Sean could stay at their house while I was in the hospital, or if my mother-in-law could take care of our house. I get along well with my in-laws. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issue doesn't exist for us. Despite coming from a prestigious family, they're very approachable and easy to talk to. Because Sean is incapable of doing housework and has a self-centered nature, my in-laws were very grateful that I married him. Sean ended up staying with his parents until I was discharged from the hospital. I checked into the maternity hospital with peace of mind. Under the care of the doctors and nurses, I safely delivered twins through a cesarean section. They were a healthy boy and girl, crying loudly. When I was discharged, Sean, both sets of parents, Sean's siblings and their families, and my parents all came. It was a gathering of 10 people. The nurses and the doctor were amazed to see so many visitors. They commented on how happy my family seemed. From the outside, we must have looked like a happy family. I was a bit embarrassed by the commotion but secretly happy. That moment was the peak of my happiness. From there, my challenging life began. Sean's attitude changed completely. My life before and after giving birth changed 180 degrees, and for the worse. Issues I thought were problematic before came to the forefront, and any slight hard-working aspect of him disappeared. It all started when Sean returned home. When Sean got home, the first thing he said was, "There's no place like home," and stretched out big. I agreed that there's nothing like your own home. But there I was, with twins in a baby carrier and backpack, hands full. Thinking about life ahead, I just couldn't relax and stretch out like that. Both Sean's parents and mine insisted on giving us space, saying, "You guys need to manage on your own." My parents live about 2 hours away by train, and they had booked a hotel for the day. I tried to convince them to stay with us, saying, "It's a waste, stay at our place," but they quickly headed to the hotel after leaving the hospital.
Home is nice, but my mom was always nagging.
In the living room, he carelessly threw the baby items we got from the hospital on the floor and flopped onto the sofa. Then he reclined and made a surprising demand.
"I want some hot tea."
There I was, holding babies both in my arms and on my back. And he's asking for hot tea. How does he expect me to fill the kettle, boil the water, put tea leaves in the teapot, and pour it into a cup? And there he was, complaining about a sore shoulder and rotating it. I decided to ignore his request for the moment. I put the twins down on the baby bed we set up next to the living room. That's when I felt a dull pain in my abdomen. The cesarean section incision hadn't fully healed. My body tensed up in pain, my face contorted, but Sean didn't even glance my way. He was casually playing with his smartphone. I couldn't yell at him and risk waking the peacefully sleeping twins. I had just been discharged from the hospital and hadn't regained my strength yet. After putting the twins to sleep, I reluctantly kept quiet. I decided I had no choice but to prioritize the twins' sleep and my recovery. Sean was not only uninterested in housework but also in childcare. Just a little while ago, we were the envy of nurses for being so happy, but now I felt only anxiety. The next day, my parents came early in the morning. By the afternoon, Sean's parents had also arrived. With both sets of parents and me, we began the arduous task of childcare. Sean, as expected, was of no help at all. In fact, he was more trouble than the babies. While watching Sean, I did my best with my first experience of childcare. My mother-in-law said, "This is the time when children teach you to be a mother." It's hard to believe someone as kind as her is Sean's mother. My parents live farther away than Sean's, so my mom can't come over easily. It looks like I'll be relying more on Sean's family. Sean's dad is still working, so I'll have to depend mostly on my mother-in-law. I'm so glad she's a kind person. Sean's parents were very affectionate towards the twins. Even when I was clumsily changing diapers, they reassured me, "No need to rush, you're doing fine." Amidst this, Sean was the one who felt left out. Since we were all focused on the twins, he seemed to feel excluded. He became more demanding than usual, saying, "I'm thirsty, I want to read the newspaper, I'm a bit hungry." Sean's dad talked to him, since Sean wasn't participating in childcare.
It can be hard for fathers to get involved in childcare, but it's rewarding once you try.
Both Sean's mom and dad are kind people. I couldn't help but wonder how someone like Sean could come from such wonderful parents. My dad also chimed in, sharing how nervous he was the first time he took me out. However, Sean showed no interest in their valuable advice. All that came from him were half-hearted responses like, "Oh, and is that so?" The stories from Sean's dad and my dad were meant to ease the awkwardness and fears of making mistakes, a kind gesture towards Sean. But it was like talking to the wind. Sean was unaffected. Then, Sean really messed up. Not only was he uninterested in childcare, but his selfish behavior finally made his parents angry. While I was breastfeeding the twins, Sean complained to me, "When's dinner? I'm starving." He even demanded a proper meal, not just something pre-made. I was perplexed about what to do when my father-in-law stepped in.
"You're not a child. If you're hungry, make something yourself."
His response was perfectly reasonable. Yet, Sean became defensive and said,
"You're a housewife, so it's natural for you to cook."
I rarely use pre-made food when I cook. But for Sean, even one pre-made item meant I was slacking off. Sean's mom joined in the argument.
"Babies can't cook and eat by themselves."
Then his dad added, "If you're so concerned about feeding, why don't you give the baby formula? You could do that." Faced with criticism from everyone, Sean made a surprising remark.
"If I start doing things like breastfeeding, then what's left for the mother to do?"
Both sets of parents were dumbfounded. I could only sigh. Afterwards, Sean's mom lectured him endlessly, and his dad thoroughly taught him how to change diapers and other childcare tasks. Sean looked lifeless, obviously doing it unwillingly and in a bad mood. 2 years passed, and I became pregnant again. Sean hadn't changed at all over these years. I continued to be overwhelmed with childcare and household chores. Without the help of Sean's parents, our life would have probably fallen apart. Sean's mom helped with housework, and his dad tried to teach Sean about childcare. Meanwhile, Sean seemed to resent his parents' involvement, always finding excuses to go out. Sean claimed he was busy with business trips and overtime, but I think he just didn't want to be at home. This pregnancy wasn't twins, but my morning sickness was worse than before. Especially the smell of cooked rice was unbearable, so inevitably, bread became a staple at our table. Sean was unhappy about this too, constantly complaining that he wanted freshly cooked rice. Angered by this, his mom told him, "If you want a meal, make it yourself." Surrounded by his parents, Sean reluctantly cooked the rice. Regardless of how it looked, I tried to eat the meal he prepared for the first time. However, due to my morning sickness, I couldn't finish it. Sean exaggeratedly sighed at the sight of the uneaten food.
"I went through all this trouble, and this is it? If it's too awful to eat, just say so,"
he said before storming out of the house. About an hour later, Sean returned. From that point on, he stopped doing any household chores or childcare. His excuse was, "You're just wasting people's kindness." Unashamed, Sean started going out fishing on weekends as his hobby. On weekdays, he would go out for drinks, citing work commitments, and come home late. There were days I didn't even see his face. Realizing this couldn't go on, I apologized several times about the meal and asked for his help around the house. I requested him to come home a bit earlier on weekdays and to spend at least some weekends at home. I was hoping he would spend even a little time with the twins. But Sean's response was unbelievable. "I've taken care of the twins for 2 years. You should be used to it by now," he said before leaving for fishing. He even said, "It's only one baby this time, not like I can do anything." The 2-year-old twins, thanks to Sean's indifferent attitude, were not at all attached to him. In fact, they seemed to dislike being around him. They would frown and look like they were about to cry whenever Sean walked by. My biggest regret is wondering why I got pregnant with a 3rd child. I must have been fooled by Sean's occasional kind gestures. It's unfortunate, but there's nothing I can do about it now. The baby in my growing belly is innocent. Despite my mixed feelings, my pregnancy progressed smoothly, and I reached full term. like the last time, I was scheduled for a cesarean section. Having experienced it before, I knew what to prepare for the hospital stay. However, the due date being right after Christmas meant a hectic holiday season. There's a big family gathering at Sean's parents' house for Christmas, but I won't be able to attend this year. The biggest problem with this childbirth is Sean. This time, there's the additional responsibility of taking care of the twins. It seems impossible without Sean's help. I wished Sean could take time off work to match the birth, but I doubt that will happen. As a last-ditch effort, I asked Sean if he could take care of the kids after he got back from work. His response was cold and devoid of any kindness. I can't make that kind of promise. What he said next was even worse.
It's embarrassing for a man to take time off work for his wife's childbirth. It's like being a useless husband under his wife's thumb.
I couldn't hold back and was about to retort when Sean demanded dinner. This stopped me in my tracks, and I lost the will to argue. Upset by my request, he continued to complain during dinner.
At 2 years old, they should be able to eat by themselves.
Sure, they might be able to eat, but they can't cook. Sean lacks that kind of imagination. I was so annoyed that I snapped back.
Well, you should be more capable than a 2-year-old. Why don't you show them how it's done?
Unfazed by my sarcasm, Sean said something outrageous.
I'm the breadwinner. You're all living off what I earn. So you should be grateful and make me dinner.
I couldn't understand his logic. His arguments were too far-fetched. Until I went to the hospital, Sean kept saying, "I'm the one providing for you." I never intended to quit my job. It was Sean who pushed the idea of me being a stay-at-home wife after we got married. Every time he says, "I'm providing for you," I think to myself, what nerve. Frustrated, I reached the week I was scheduled to be admitted to the hospital. Then, Sean made another tactless comment.
You should attend the Christmas party.
I couldn't understand why he would say that. Apparently, it looked bad for the head of the family to attend alone. He had no understanding of the pain and risks of childbirth. Childbirth is a life-risking endeavor. Sean's unreasonable demands continued.
Why do I have to attend alone? Who's going to cook and serve drinks?
It's as if he mistook me for a servant or a maid. The idea of risking my life for Sean's reputation was unbelievable. Sean often comes up with such ideas. We went back and forth with "come" and "it's impossible" several times. Finally, my father-in-law talked to Sean, and it was decided that I wouldn't attend. As the new year approached and the day before my hospital admission arrived, Sean was still sulking. Unfortunately, today was the day of the Christmas party. On the day of the party, I was lying down with a tight belly next to the twins. Suddenly, I noticed Sean standing over me. With sleepy eyes, I looked up at him.
Today, I'm hosting a Christmas party for 20 family members.
Make sure you don't embarrass me. What was Sean thinking? I was totally confused by his statement. I was sure the Christmas party was supposed to be at Sean's brother's house. Sean squatted down and shook my shoulder. "Prepare a meal for 20 relatives and some desserts that women would enjoy," he said. It seemed Sean had unilaterally decided to host the Christmas party at our house. Everyone in the family, including Sean's parents, had been considerate about our twins and my current pregnancy. I couldn't understand why suddenly 20 people were coming over today. I hadn't noticed, but there were missed calls from my mother-in-law and father-in-law on my phone. I'm due to be hospitalized tomorrow. I could go into labor at any moment. Hosting 20 relatives in such a condition is absolutely impossible. I told Sean, "It's impossible to do all this at the last minute." I asked, "Even if it costs more, can we have a catering service or something?" I even humbly suggested. But Sean exploded in anger. I said, "We're doing it at my house."
Are you trying to embarrass me? As the wife of the eldest son of the main family, you should keep up appearances.
Sean was imposing his selfish will on me. Continuing with outdated notions like a wife should just be quiet and obey her husband. I no longer had the energy to argue back. When I fell silent, Sean seemed to take it as agreement and smiled. Then he said, "I'm going to pick up the relatives now, so you get everything ready for hosting," and left immediately. With everything so arranged, I couldn't refuse. It would cause trouble for all the relatives. So, I started to prepare, despite my large belly. I emailed Sean, "I can't go shopping now, so I'll have to make do with what's available." Thinking about my hospital stay, I had stocked up on food for Sean. So the fridge was nearly empty, no matter. I managed to prepare the food while pressing on my tight belly. For drinks and alcohol, which I was short on, I decided to order delivery. Just as I finished all the preparations, I got a message from Sean that he was on his way home. In just 2 hours, I had managed to prepare the meals and drinks. I wanted to pat myself on the back. I put the twins to bed in the back room as they were starting to doze off. Soon, I heard voices and the front door opening. I went to the entrance to greet everyone. My mother-in-law and father-in-law asked me if I was okay. Their call earlier must have been out of concern. I just smiled vaguely, unable to say much else. The living and dining rooms were packed with 20 people as the Christmas party began. I was busy serving food and pouring drinks, with no time to sit down. Everyone kept asking me, "Are you okay?" and "Don't overdo it," to which I just smiled and brushed off. Sean, on the other hand, was in a great mood, boasting, "She's tough, that's her strong point." But Sean's parents and brother had frowns on their faces. Due to standing and moving around to serve drinks, the tightness in my belly became unbearable. I excused myself, saying, "I'm going to check on the sleeping kids," and left the room. As I looked at the children's sleeping faces, my eyelids grew heavy, and I lay down. After a while, the tightness turned into pain. Not wanting to worry everyone, I covered my mouth with both hands. But the pain in my abdomen grew stronger and clearer. It had been 3 hours since Sean sprung the news of the Christmas party on me. As I endured the pain, suddenly the door opened. It was Sean's brother. It seemed to have mistaken the room for the bathroom. "Sorry, wrong room," he said before closing the door and hurrying away. Shortly after, Sean's parents came in. Seeing me clutching my stomach and breathing heavily, they clenched their fists and looked furious. The next moment, Sean's mother shouted Sean and went back to the living room. I also staggered to my feet and returned to the living room. There, Sean's father had grabbed Sean by the collar, and the next moment a loud smack echoed through the room. Sean's cheek was red. His father had slapped him. His father's eyes were sharp, and his usually gentle face looked demonic. Even I, who wasn't being scolded, was taken aback. Sean was frozen in shock, his eyes wide open.
"What are you doing?"
His father yelled so loudly that Sean flinched. All the relatives who had been drinking and chatting stopped and stared at Sean in silence.
"Do you understand Kelly's condition?"
Sean's mother glared at him with a fierce look. One of the relatives noticed me and offered me a seat on the sofa. Others began to confront Sean. "You said the delivery wasn't due yet, but she's about to give birth. I thought you said she was still in the safe period," were some of the comments I heard. Apparently, Sean had told the relatives that my delivery wasn't due yet to get them to come. He had told his parents that there were no signs of labor yet, and my hospitalization was postponed. Everyone started looking at Sean with contempt. Relatives with children the same age as the twins were there, and some of them were saying, "I can't believe it." Women were heard saying, "If I were in her shoes, I'd be horrified, this is unforgivable, and he's the worst kind of husband." Others were saying, "We didn't know, sorry, and Sean deceived us." The atmosphere was more like a funeral than a Christmas party. Unable to bear the tension, Sean started making pitiful excuses.
"She's using the twins and her pregnancy as an excuse to slack off on housework."
Everyone focused on Sean, shocked at what he was saying.
"That's why I made her cook for 20 people today and serve drinks."
What he was saying made no sense to me. And probably even less to everyone else. But Sean continued.
"She's been slacking off. This doesn't even make up for it."
There were murmurs of disbelief. He made her cook? And for 20 people? Sean began to sweat under the accusing glares. A female relative suggested they break up the party and began cleaning up. The twins' cries could be heard from the back. Sean's parents headed to the twins. Sean's brother has a child about the same age as ours. He looked at Sean with contempt and muttered softly, "He's the worst." Sean was being called the worst as both a husband and a father, shrinking under the scrutiny. His usual assertive and arrogant demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, my belly started to hurt. The intervals of pain were getting shorter. It was probably labor. I called out to Sean, who was being scolded and shrinking away. But he didn't respond. Someone asked me, should we call the hospital, and I nodded slightly. Another person brought me a phone, and I called the hospital. They told me to come right away. I informed everyone, I'm going to the hospital now, but couldn't get up. Sean's brother suggested calling an ambulance, and that's when Sean reacted.
If you call an ambulance, tell them not to use the siren. It's embarrassing if the neighbors find out.
I couldn't believe he was more concerned about appearances than my condition. Everyone was stunned by his words, and Sean continued.
Go by yourself. It's your fault for ruining the mood anyway.
It definitely wasn't my fault, it was all because of Sean's lies. Everyone else must think the same. Amidst the stunned silence, another smack was heard. Sean's mother had returned and slapped his cheek. Sean, his cheek held, was tearful.
I never thought you would be such a rotten person. Giving birth is a life-threatening endeavor.
Behind her, Sean's father was holding the twins, looking furious.
The pain Kelly is experiencing is nothing like this,
he exclaimed, trembling with anger and carefully setting the twins down.
I'm not in the wrong. It's because I'm the one supporting them,
Sean insisted, saying it was my fault for embarrassing him in front of others and that he wasn't to blame. Even in this situation, he was flaunting his elitist attitude. Of course, no one sympathized with him. The sister-in-law raised her hand. I haven't been drinking, I can drive. Everyone cheered. It was decided she would drive our car, and people began to move quickly, helping with my hospital bag and cleaning up. The bag was ready in the bedroom, so I asked Sean's mother to fetch it. Sean's father started helping with the dishes. Sean alone, rubbing his slapped cheek, muttered, "If you weren't my parents, I'd sue you." His face turned red. Perhaps embarrassed at his wounded pride. Meanwhile, the twins started crying loudly because of the commotion. The men took turns comforting them while the women hurried to clean up. Sean didn't help at all. Everyone else seemed to have stopped paying attention to him. I felt utterly disgusted with Sean. I honestly thought I no longer needed such a useless man. Sean's brother, who's good at entertaining children, started playing with the twins. He said, I often play with kids at home, so leave it to me, and started playing with the twins. I managed to stand up with support and informed him about the toys in the kids' room and that they didn't have any food allergies. I added that he could use anything in the fridge. Sean kept muttering, I'm not wrong, but I ignored him and headed for the door. Sean's sister-in-law then drove me to the hospital. Upon arrival, a nurse quickly called a doctor, who took me to the delivery room. It seemed labor could happen at any moment. As expected, as soon as I was on the delivery bed, I gave birth. It was a relief that the delivery was smooth. The only one who suffered was my sister-in-law. She couldn't go home and had to stay until the next morning. The day after I safely gave birth, Sean's parents came to the hospital with the twins. After the incident, Sean sulked in a corner of the room, drinking canned beer. Sean's father took him to the bedroom. Not wanting the children to see their father being scolded, a thoughtful gesture from him. I heard Sean's father scolded him all night. And Sean looked deflated. Sean's father told me this with a wry smile. After a while, Sean came to my hospital room. In front of his parents, he was meek and apologized in a low voice, saying, sorry about yesterday. The fact that both his parents had hit him seemed to have a significant impact on him. Sensing the situation, Sean's parents left us alone. As soon as they were gone, Sean's attitude changed.
I was slapped by Dad and Mom because of you.
He continued to complain about how I was inconsiderate and not thoughtful enough. At that moment, I was utterly fed up with Sean. I firmly decided to divorce him. Despite feeling anxious about becoming a single mother of 3, I knew I couldn't stay with Sean. I pressed the nurse call button without hesitation. A nurse came right away. Sean's parents followed her, returning to the room.
He's a stranger to me. Please ask him to leave.
The nurse looked confused, but Sean's mother understood and promptly escorted Sean out of the room. Sean's parents left the hospital with him. Before they left, they told me my parents would come in the afternoon. Indeed, my parents arrived later that day. I told them about the previous day's events and my decision to divorce Sean. My parents initially thought Sean had cheated when they heard about the divorce from Sean's mother. They had been under the impression that divorce meant infidelity. They never imagined a heavily pregnant wife being commanded by her husband to prepare for a Christmas party and serve drinks. I explained everything to my parents, including being forced to cook for 20 people and serve drinks, how hard it had been, and how much I had endured. We all cried as I spoke. By the end of our conversation, we were smiling, relieved after crying. Rest at home after the birth, my mother kindly said. I was discharged safely and am now recuperating at my parents' house. About the divorce, Sean's parents agreed there was no reason to oppose it. The only one strongly against it was Sean. He kept contacting me. But I blocked his calls and told his parents not to let him contact me. It seems Sean has lost his mental stability without me, who he treated like a servant. Living alone, Sean couldn't manage to clean up his house, and it became cluttered with trash. At work, he vented his frustration by repeatedly committing acts of power harassment, nearly facing disciplinary action from human resources. Despite this, Sean's attitude didn't change, and he even harassed his work clients. Eventually, Sean was fired. At that time, it seemed no one sympathized with him. Now, he's working in the fields at his parents' home, apparently being reprimanded and taught a lesson. Sean often cries saying, "The house where I lived with Kelly was my oasis." I heard all of that from his mother, with whom I'm still in contact. But for me, that house was nothing but a desert. With the help of Sean's parents, our divorce was successfully finalized. The house we lived in was sold, and I received all the money from the sale as alimony. I've decided to live at my parents' home. I still keep in touch with Sean's parents and brother. Sometimes, they come to play with the twins who say they missed the sister and brother who played with us that time. For Sean's parents, the twins are still their grandchildren. They visit when they can, happily playing with all 3 grandchildren. The kids are fond of their grandpa and grandma. I feel that if the Christmas party hadn't happened, I might not have been able to go to the hospital. Sean, on his own, couldn't have managed to take me to the hospital and look after the twins. Plus, that incident helped me make up my mind about Sean. In a way, I'm thankful to Sean for holding that party at our house. It really is a case of blessing in disguise. You never know how things will turn out. I'll never forget the gratitude I feel towards those who helped me then. With my 3 children, I want to become even happier and help others just as I was helped.
Right now, my dad is in critical condition. Can you come right away? I'll give you the hospital's address.
What? No way, I've just arrived at my vacation spot.
Huh? Vacation? What are you talking about? My father is in a serious situation.
When I got angry like that, my husband said something unbelievable.
I mean, I'm not really involved with him, you know.
What?
I'm exhausted from work every day. Let me have this trip.
I felt my feelings for him cooling down rapidly.
Fine. Don't bother coming back then.
My name is Julie, a 30-year-old housewife. I've been married to Ken for 3 years. We met at a social gathering. Being of the same age and sharing similar interests, we were drawn to each other and began to meet just the 2 of us. After several dates, he confessed, and we started dating. He was bright and refreshing, always making me laugh. I was increasingly attracted to him. Our relationship went smoothly from there. About 2 years into our relationship, he proposed to me.
My feelings for you will never change. I want to build a warm home with you. Will you marry me? Yes. I'd be honored.
I immediately accepted his proposal. And so, we decided to get married. We then visited each other's parents to announce our marriage. My in-laws were very kind, and I felt relieved there wouldn't be any mistreatment. After a successful meeting between our families, we got married. Then our married life began. I quit my job to become a full-time housewife, as Ken had wanted. I worked hard at household chores, supporting him in every way. I made sure my cooking, laundry, and cleaning were top-notch. I paid special attention to our meals, ensuring a variety of dishes and different menus daily. It seemed like he was satisfied with my efforts.
Your cooking is so good, it makes me want to come home early every day. I'm glad to hear that. I'll keep making delicious food.
Thank you. Seeing him happy while eating made me feel joyous. I believed we would continue to live happily together. But things started to change after our daughter Mina was born. Being a new mom, I struggled with many unknowns in parenting. Sometimes, I couldn't manage household chores as I wished. Mina often woke up at night, making it hard for me to get up early and prepare Ken's lunch.
Sorry, can you buy lunch today? Mina kept me up until 4 a.m.
What? No lunch?
I don't want to eat out. Then you should have stayed up and made lunch.
What?
You're just relaxing during the day, right?
Sleep when I'm at work. Frustrated, Ken snatched $50 from me and left for work. I was stunned by his words. I didn't expect such a reaction. I was doing my best with parenting and household chores alone. I accepted doing household chores since I'm a housewife. But I wanted his help with parenting. There's no rule saying I should be the only one to bathe her, change diapers, or soothe her at night. However, Ken seemed to think his job was done by working, and parenting was solely my role. He couldn't accept any slack in household chores because of our child.
Is this another lazy meal?
What? Lazy?
It's obvious.
What do you mean? There's a main dish, 2 side dishes, and a soup.
The main dish is weak. You used to make more substantial meals. Are you slacking off?
I've told you, I'm swamped with childcare and can't spend as much time on household chores.
That's just an excuse. My mom always managed, even with me and my brother. She had it harder than you with just one child.
You're just being lazy.
But
I never thought he could be so insensitive. He seemed so kind and gentlemanly before marriage, but turned out to be a completely different person after having a child. As a full-time housewife with a child, and not working, I had no choice but to rely on my husband Ken's salary. I felt it was unfair, but I couldn't stand up to him, fearing that being abandoned would be the end for me. In the end, I couldn't argue back and just accepted what he said. It really infuriated me when Ken seemed pleased with himself for having the upper hand. I wanted to go back to my parents' house to relieve stress, but it was quite a distance from our home, making it hard to visit easily. This added to my frustration. If I could meet and talk with my mom during the day, it would help me let off some steam and feel more at ease. However, the distance meant I often had to endure alone. Despite this, I managed to balance childcare and household chores. Time passed, and my daughter Mina turned 3. At this age, she began to speak a lot more, and conversing with her became a way for me to take a break. Now that she started going to kindergarten, I had some time to myself, which allowed me to do housework and relax more. However, my relationship with Ken was growing colder by the year. He seemed not to want to be with me anymore and started coming home later and later. Usually, he returned around midnight, sometimes just catching the last train. He rarely ate dinner at home and barely interacted with Mina. He would come home when she was asleep and leave for work before she woke up, so they hardly saw each other. At one point, Mina even thought of Ken as just some man who was around on weekends. I felt it was bad that her own father was seen this way by his daughter.
Ken, can't you come home earlier? Mina doesn't even recognize you as her father. She asked me where her dad was and what he was doing. She tells her kindergarten teachers she doesn't have a father, and they even asked if we were divorced.
Ken seemed a bit shocked by this, but unwilling to change.
I'm working late, then going out with my boss and juniors for drinks. It's all linked to my earnings, which supports our family. So, you should handle these things. That's your role as a wife and mother.
In the end, he just dumped everything on me. It sounded plausible, but essentially, he didn't want to do anything. I doubted whether he was really working overtime or just out drinking. While I nodded along to his words, inside, I doubted him. It was foolish of me to have hoped for his understanding. He didn't share my sense of crisis at all. Underestimating a child can lead to a harsh backlash someday. And while Ken claimed he was working hard, our financial situation hadn't improved. If he was truly working overtime, it meant he was spending the extra money on himself, which was pointless and only beneficial to him. Ken began going out alone more often on weekends, even telling me to pack for sudden business trips. He seemed to see me more as a housekeeper. It seems like the only reason for continuing our marriage is because I take care of everything around the house. I didn't want to live just to take care of him. This rebellious feeling grew within me. But as long as we depended on Ken's salary, I couldn't just leave with Mina. So, I told Ken I wanted to work part-time during the day. Earning my own money, even a little, was important. As expected, he wasn't happy.
Huh? That's unnecessary. You just need to take care of the house as a full-time housewife. I want to save for when Mina wants to take classes or for school expenses. Of course, I'll still do the housework. Besides, you're hardly home for dinner these days. Me working during the day won't affect anything.
After some thought, Ken agreed.
Just make sure you do the laundry and cleaning. That's the condition. I promise I'll manage everything properly,
I assured him. This way, I convinced Ken and started working. Perhaps it was the way I phrased it. Not blaming him, but suggesting it wouldn't disrupt our current lifestyle. Ken must have realized that whether I worked during the day or not didn't matter. I immediately started looking for a job and found an office position with short hours. I was hired, much to my surprise. Working part-time and interacting with people of various ages and perspectives was a significant change for me. It widened my horizons and kept me in a better mental state. Earning my own money gave me confidence and strength. I worked hard and soon earned recognition at work.
Julie, you catch on so quickly. You're a great help. I wish you could become a full-time employee.
Yeah, Julie, aren't you interested in becoming a full-time staff member?
Well,
honestly, I was very interested. But becoming a full-time employee would make it difficult to balance childcare and household chores. First off, Ken probably wouldn't approve. When I shared this with my superiors, they looked disappointed but understood. However, I made it clear that I wasn't uninterested, so maybe there'll be another chance in the future. So I decided to keep working hard and wait for the right time. Meanwhile, something concerning Ken started bothering me. I suspected he was having an affair. One day, during my lunch break at work, I went to eat at a casual Italian restaurant downtown. That's when I saw Ken leaving the restaurant with a woman I didn't know. Ken was in a suit, and the woman looked more like she was dressed for work than for leisure, so maybe they were just colleagues having lunch. This alone wasn't enough to conclude he was having an affair. But, call it a woman's intuition, I felt there was a high chance Ken was cheating with that woman. So, I decided to hire a detective agency to investigate. Maybe Ken's late nights were because he was meeting with his mistress, not staying late with his boss as he claimed. He didn't look as tired as he should have been, probably because he was enjoying his time with his mistress. While making these assumptions, I waited for the investigation results. About 2 weeks later, the results came in. Ken was indeed having an affair. And the woman was the one I had seen. I felt a strange sense of relief that my suspicions were correct. Probably because this meant I could end things with Ken. If he was cheating, he would be at a significant disadvantage in a divorce. I could claim alimony and child support. And with a job offer for a full-time position, I felt confident I could manage even if we divorced. I decided to leave Ken. But then, I got a call from my mom.
Hello, Mom, what's up? Julie, I'm sorry to call you out of the blue. Your dad collapsed and has been taken to the hospital.
What?
I hurriedly took Mina with me to the hospital. I hadn't visited my parents in several months and hadn't seen them since then. Hearing about my dad's sudden collapse was a shock. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my mom looking anxious.
Mom! Julie! Thank you for coming. How's Dad?
He's undergoing treatment now. We were relaxing at home, and he collapsed when I returned from the bathroom.
I see.
I patted my mother's back. She must have been shocked to witness her partner collapsing. The thought of losing my father was distressing. Just thinking about that made me feel really hurt. After a while, the doctor came out and informed us that my dad had suffered a stroke. He regained consciousness, but his condition was still precarious. Dad was admitted to the hospital. We went to his room and waited by his side as he slept. A few hours later, he slowly woke up.
Dad! Hey!
I'm sorry for worrying you. I'm just glad you woke up.
The doctor came and checked my dad's condition. He was stable for now, but there was no telling if his condition might worsen. Mina had fallen asleep, so I left her with my mom and went back to our house to get some of Dad's clothes. During this time, I sent Ken a message, informing him that my dad was seriously ill and in the hospital. Ken didn't read my message immediately, but I figured I had done my part in informing him and hurried back to my parents' house. Later, we returned to the hospital, where my mom, Mina, and I stayed with my dad through the night, hoping for his recovery. He seemed to be breathing steadily, and I thought he might get better. However, his condition worsened by midday. He was rushed to the treatment room, hooked up to numerous tubes, and treatment began. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might not make it. I tried to contact Ken again. Given that my father was in critical condition, I really wanted Ken, as his son-in-law, to be there. But I couldn't get through to him. It was Saturday, so he should have been off work. Maybe he had been out drinking till late and was now asleep. Just as I thought I couldn't rely on him, the call connected.
Hello? What's up?
Ken, can you come to the hospital right away?
What? The hospital? What do you mean?
My dad's in critical condition. Can you come immediately? I'll give you the address.
I was about to tell him the address when he interrupted.
What? No way, I've already arrived at my travel destination.
Travel? What are you talking about?
Oh, didn't I tell you? Some colleagues and I planned a 2-day trip, and today's the day. I'm already here, so I can't go to the hospital.
What are you saying? My father is in a serious situation.
When I got angry, Ken said something outrageous.
I mean, I'm not really involved, you know.
What?
I'm exhausted from work every day. I deserve a break on my day off. Let me have this trip.
He shouted. I felt my feelings for him cooling down rapidly. I don't care about you anymore.
Don't bother coming back.
I hung up and returned to my mom and daughter, where we watched over my father. Unfortunately, despite the treatment, he never regained consciousness and passed away. We were engulfed in grief. I wondered how much we cried. My mom must have been terribly shocked. She and my dad were very close. We were in a daze, unable to think about anything for a while. But we couldn't cry forever. We gathered ourselves and began making arrangements for my dad's funeral. The wake was held the next day, and the funeral the day after. Many relatives, friends, and others who admired my dad attended. Just before the funeral began, Ken showed up.
Sorry. I'm late. I couldn't make it when your dad was critical.
His apology seemed half-hearted. Not sincere. I confronted him as he approached.
Why are you here? People who aren't related should leave.
What?
I'm your dad's son-in-law. Are you angry I'm late? Everyone's already here, don't get too emotional.
He tried to calm me down. But I stood my ground.
When I told you my dad was in critical condition and asked you to come to the hospital, you said you were on a trip and it was impossible, right? You yelled at me, saying you deserved the trip.
The funeral hall buzzed with my words.
Hey! Don't talk like that! I was on a work trip with colleagues. I couldn't just leave. It might have affected my work. A colleague so narrow-minded that they can't let you leave during a family emergency won't achieve much at work. Or were you really with your mistress? What? What are you talking about? Stop making baseless accusations. That's defamation. Sadly for you, I have evidence of your affair. What? I had hired a detective agency. There are lots of evidence photos in my bag. But for now, I'll show you the data saved on my phone.
I showed him the screen, and his face turned pale.
When did you?
Suddenly, my in-laws stepped in front of Ken, and my mother-in-law slapped him.
What are you doing? Betraying Julie and Mina and having an affair. You disgrace.
The in-laws scolded him while he stood there in shock. The funeral attendees looked at him coldly. My in-laws apologized to my mom and me. Then took Ken away. Afterward, I contacted a lawyer, demanded a divorce from Ken, and filed for alimony and child support. Ken ended up with a substantial debt. I reported everything to his workplace, and he lost his standing there. Now, he's been relegated to another department, treated coldly by his colleagues, and cut off by his in-laws. He lives a lonely life, mostly paying off his debts. Ken's mistress seemed to have treated their affair as just a fling, and she quickly disappeared from his life. Meanwhile, I moved back to my parents' house and now live there with my mom and daughter, Mina. When I discussed my situation with my company, they said the offer to become a full-time employee still stands. If I request it, they're willing to make the switch right away. This should make supporting my daughter no problem at all. I asked Mina how she felt about not seeing her father anymore, and she said it was okay since he was practically non-existent in her life anyway. Even if Ken wants to see Mina, I doubt she'd be interested in meeting him. I plan to continue pouring my love into Mina, spending happy and joyful days with my mom and daughter.